Good afternoon and welcome to a wonderful session of Mongolian biology once again. Today we are going to discuss about the basic feature of life. That is, you know pretty well that there are three basic features of life. They are response, growth and reproduction. Every living thing, in fact the living cell, has got three basic functions. They are response, the growth, and of course the reproduction. Primarily, every cell, that is every living entity, has to show the response. So being a human being, being a living entity, we need to show response for proper sustenance of life in this body. And here we talk about two major systems that influence this factor of response. They are the nervous system and of course the endocrine system. Nervous system and endocrine system, both these systems bring about coordination between the different systems in our body. And here it is evident that endocrine system brings about a change from within the body, whereas the nervous system, while coordinating the body activities, it responds to the stimulus from outside. That's of course a different story. We will be dealing with that in the next video. As of today, in this session, we are going to discuss about the endocrine system, which is activated from within the body, right from the womb to the tomb. That means when the life originates in the form of the mother's womb, in a zygote, until the last breath of the human being, the endocrine system dictates the quality of life. How? Let us explore this beautiful world. Okay? Now, let's come to the point. The human endocrine system consists of several glands which secrete hormones. Hormones are the biochemical substances which are released by the endocrine glands into the blood directly. See, in our body there are two types of glands basically. There are duct glands and ductless glands. These duct glands are the associated glands with the digestive system or maybe any other system. But here the endocrine glands are said to be the ductless glands because the secretions are called as hormones, which are none other than the biochemical substances that trigger, that influence, that actually dictate terms to the quality of life in the individual. Now, the human endocrine system has got majorly 6 types of endocrine glands in our body. These endocrine glands function as per the need of the individual. Now, the basic one and the most important one is the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is present attached to the hypothalamus of the brain. It consists of anterior lobe, a middle lobe and a posterior lobe. It resembles to that of the head of a matchstick. It's very tiny. However, the function is enormous. The pituitary secretions actually control all the other endocrine glands. That means it influences, that is the pituitary hormones or the pituitary gland influences the functioning of all the other remaining endocrine glands, and hence it is called as the master gland. It is called as the master of endocrine orchestra because the functioning of these other glands is dependent majorly on the influence that is shown upon by the pituitary gland secretions or the pituitary hormones. So I repeat once again, hormones bring about a qualitative and quantitative change in our body, right from the womb to the tomb. Now, let us talk about the details of each and every gland and their secretions. Now, the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is located, as I said just now, in the brain, attached to the floor of the hypothalamus with a stalk and a head. This head resembles to that of the head of a matchstick. It's very tiny in structure. Now, pituitary gland secretes majorly these 8 types of hormones. The first one is growth hormone. Here we need to talk about a system wherein the hormones have got some target organs in our body. These target organs are influenced by a particular hormone for their activation. When we talk about the functioning of these organs, by and large, it depends upon the levels of hormones that influence them. So it is quite interesting to note that the quantity of hormone that is released by the endocrine gland actually influences the functioning of each and every organ in our body. Now, the target organs for each and every gland are separate. In fact, each and every hormone has got individual targeted organs in our body. Now we shall talk about each and every hormone and the target organ and its influence. And of course, the lagging condition and excessive release condition. Now, the growth hormone. Growth hormone is released by the pituitary gland. It triggers the growth. It increases the activity of cell division, thereby contributing for the growth of the individual in the bones and muscles. Actually, to say, when the size has to increase in an organism, maybe human being or any other organism, it counts for the bones in vertebrates. However, the number of cells is increased by the rapid cell division, which is triggered by the growth hormone. So, in conditions of lack of growth hormone secretion by the pituitary gland, the person will have to suffer with what I can say dwarfism, means stunted growth. We can't expect the child to grow in a proper manner at the optimum range according to the age. In conditions of excessive release of growth hormone, it results in the growth to reach the height of a giant, and hence we call it as gigantism. So lack of lesser release of growth hormone results in dwarfism, and excessive release of growth hormone by the pituitary gland results in gigantism, means heavy growth or profuse growth. It is also quite dangerous. Now the second one, prolactin. Prolactin and oxytocin, of course, these two are the hormones, pituitary hormones in particular. They act combinedly on the breast of the woman to produce the milk as and when the child is born. After conceiving the child, the body of the mother gets ready to feed the baby. Once the baby comes out of the body after being separated from the mother, when the placenta is cut, the baby has to be fed with her milk. So the milk production in the breast or the mammary glands is triggered by the release of prolactin and oxytocin by the pituitary gland. When prolactin and oxytocin are very inadequately released in the body of a woman from the pituitary gland, she will be unable to feed her baby because of lesser release of milk. So the milk production in the mammary glands by and large depends upon the secretions of prolactin and oxytocin. In conditions of excessive release of oxytocin or prolactin, there will be larger quantity of milk that is produced in the mammary glands. That again will be a little bit difficult for her to cope up. She requires medical support. Then vasopressin. This is an important and interesting hormone that is responsible for reabsorption of water into the body. See, generally excess of water is sent out in the form of urine when kidneys filter the blood and separate the excess water and send it out from the body through urine. Here, in small children, vasopressin is released in very lesser quantities. When the child attains an age of 6 or 7 years, the adequacy of vasopressin is attained, and hence there will be no bedwetting in children who are grown. But we see some kids still they wet the beds because of lesser release of vasopressin by the pituitary gland. So vasopressin is responsible for the reabsorption of water, and hence we call it as antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone that is released by the pituitary gland is vasopressin. Then thyroid stimulating hormone. One of the wonderful hormones that is released by the pituitary gland is thyroid stimulating hormone. See, thyroid gland is present in the throat region. This thyroid gland is to be activated for the functioning of the body organs. So it has to release, that is the thyroid gland has to release its own, hormone. And for that, it has to be initiated with the thyroid stimulating hormone. We call it as TSH. Thyroid stimulating hormone. This thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates the thyroid gland, and hence the thyroid gland gets activated, thereby it secretes its corresponding hormone that we will be dealing later in this class itself. Then adrenocorticotropic hormone. Adrenocorticotropic hormone. Renal means kidney. Adreno, that means some glands which are associated or which are attached to the kidneys. So these glands are also very, very important, the adrenal glands. So adrenocorticotropic hormone, this hormone released by the pituitary gland initiates the action of adrenal glands. Just as in the case of TSH, here the pituitary secretion called as ACTH, the adrenocorticotropic hormone, it influences the functioning of adrenal glands. Adrenal glands are located just like caps over the kidneys. Then only the adrenal glands will release the corresponding hormones. And next is the luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Just as in the case of prolactin and oxytocin, here also the luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone will be going or will be functioning hand in hand. Means they combinedly show their activation. The luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone are responsible for the functioning of gonadal glands, that is the sexual glands. So in the process of reproduction, the mind has to be tuned and the body has to be tuned. Physically and mentally, before the act of sexual activity, the body and the mind have to be tuned. And here, the physical and psychological readiness is brought about by luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone over the sexual glands. So it is a pituitary gland that is responsible to show this much of impact over the body in all aspects. And hence we call it as the master gland of endocrine system or master of endocrine orchestra. Here we will end up with the concept of pituitary gland. Now let us move on to the thyroid gland. The second endocrine gland in our body is thyroid gland. Thyroid gland is present in the throat region. It releases triiodothyroxine, which brings about the secondary sexual characters. The secondary sexual characters are those which qualify an individual into either male or female definitely. When we talk about secondary sexual characters, it's a big question. Then what would be the primary sexual characters? Possession of male or female sex organs or the reproductive organs during the time of birth itself is called as primary sexual character. But it doesn't entitle the person to become a perfect male or a female. The secondary sexual characters have to be triggered, they have to be activated, and it is here that the thyroid gland plays a major role. Thyroid gland stimulates, that is, it releases the triiodothyroxine. This triiodothyroxine is also called as thyroxine, in other words, commonly called as thyroxine. This triiodothyroxine brings about secondary sexual characters separately in males and females. The transformation of childhood into adulthood is made possible by this gland, by this hormone. In boys, let us list out the changes. When the boy is getting transformed into a man, these changes will occur. Number one, the change in the pitch of the voice, it becomes low pitched. it becomes a bass voice. This low-pitched voice is a characteristic feature of man. Actually, up to an age of 10 or 11 years or maybe 12 years in boys, until the adulthood is triggered, the voice resembles to that of a girl. We just cannot, demarcate or just can't recognize the difference between a male and female voice in children. It is only when this triiodothyroxine activates, then we find the change in the voice. So, a low-pitched voice in boys. Secondly, the appearance of moustache and beard and growth of characteristic hair over the body. In loins as well as the armpits and over the chest. The appearance of moustache, beard, the hair, characteristic hair over the chest and the armpits as well as the loins, that is near the genitals. Growth of hair begins by the activation of thyroxine. So the transformation will be slowly taking place inside the body. As I said earlier, the hormones trigger the change from within. So the hormone called as triiodothyroxine will be bringing about the change from within the body, and hence the boy will even recognize himself to be a new person. At this same time, he gets to know that there has been a change evidently from time to time in his body and even in his thoughts also. We find a little bit of maturity from time to time, and this is brought about by the thyroid gland, and hence we say it is qualitative change. A quantitative change means due to growth hormone the height will increase, the weight will increase, but whereas the thyroxine brings about a change in the physical form as well as the mental stature of the individual. So, appearance of moustache, appearance of beard, appearance of hair over the body in particular zones, as I said now itself. These are the factors that contribute for the development of the child by the thyroxine in boys. Then, the increase in size of the genital, that is the penis grows in size by the activation of thyroxine. Even the boy feels himself to be a man. He feels himself to be an adult. On attainment of an age of 15 to 16 or maybe 18 years, this change will continue. So, the transformation from boyhood to the adulthood, boyhood to the manhood, is due to the hormone called as thyroxine. Then, in girls, the skin becomes very, very glowy, smooth. The texture of the skin, it becomes smooth. Then the voice becomes high-pitched. Contrasting to the change in the boys, here the voice becomes high-pitched in girls. And at the same time, the growth of breast or the mammary glands begins on the onset of puberty. So this is said to be the hormone of puberty. Puberty is triggered by the activation of the body by the thyroxine hormone. The growth of breast and the hip region. So the abdominal muscles get accumulated with fat. The change of the body shape and structure is evident. The physical growth is set at a particular pace by the thyroxine. So thyroxine is said to be a very, very important hormone. Now, with regards to the thyroxine, it is very important to note that in children who don't take the iodine in adequate quantities, they will suffer with hypothyroidism, means lack of the changes that are caused due to thyroxine, the lesser release of thyroxine. In northeastern states, we find this condition, and then it results in the disease called as simple goiter. Simple goiter. There will be a swelling in the throat region. This clearly indicates that the person is suffering with thyroxine hormone deficiency due to lack of iodine in their diet. So here we end up with this thyroid gland. Now let's move on to the third one, the parathyroid. Parathyroid gland is very simple. It is just located behind the thyroid gland. Thyroid gland is present in the front part, seen attached to the trachea, just like an open-winged butterfly. Whereas the parathyroid gland is located just behind the thyroid gland. Thyroid gland is a beautiful gland that is seen just like open-winged butterfly. And this open-winged butterfly shaped thyroid gland will be coordinated in its function with the parathyroid. The parathyroid gland releases parathormone. The hormone released by parathyroid is parathormone. This regulates the maintenance of body salts and water level. That is called as osmoregulation and salt gradient maintenance. The salt or ionic gradient maintenance. This salt gradient maintenance and the water content regulation is maintained by parathormone. This is the function of parathyroid. Now let us move on to the important and the very interesting topic, the adrenals. The adrenals, just as I said earlier, these are present, seen attached to a pair of kidneys, just like when we see kidneys like this, these are found just like caps. So on both the kidneys, you find the adrenal glands like this. These adrenal glands are present one pair in number, just like caps over the kidneys. These have got two regions, the adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla. Adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla are the two regions or the two zones of adrenal glands. The adrenal cortex releases aldosterone and cortisol. These two hormones are released by adrenal cortex. It releases two types of hormones, the aldosterone and the cortisol. These two trigger the immunity inside the body. Cortisol and aldosterone are the two hormones released by the adrenal cortex and medulla. It releases a very, very important and dynamic hormone called as adrenaline. Adrenaline is said to be a very dynamic hormone because it is called as the hormone of fight and flight. In conditions of combating with the enemy, in conditions of beholding the emotions, this adrenaline plays a major role. When adrenaline is released into the blood, when the rush of adrenaline is seen in a person, he reacts in both the ways, both aggressively and timidly, based on the situations that he is encountering. Hence it is called as the hormone of fight or flight. It actually controls the emotions of the body, emotions of the individual. What are these emotions? The fear, the most important one, and the first one is fear. The happiness, the ecstasy, the anxiety, the anger. These are some of the most important emotions that we experience. And it is the quality of the life that is determined by the maintenance or management of these emotions. So the best manager or the most important element in our body with regards to hormones is the adrenaline. When adrenaline is released in lesser quantities, the blood pressure slows down. Adrenaline, when released in larger quantities or excess quantities, increases the blood pressure, thereby contributing for the aggressive nature and exhibition of more energy. There will be an aggressive behavior in the individual because of release of adrenaline. In sportsmen, when they enjoy their success, the gestures and postures are made possible only due to the adrenaline in their blood. Now, let us talk about pancreas. Pancreas is also equally important but very, very specific gland because it is called as dual gland. This dual gland Why we call it as dual gland means it performs both exocrine and endocrine functions. Endocrine means into the body. Crinus means secretion. Endo means into. Into what? Into the blood. Exocrine means particularly into an organ. See, in digestive system, the pancreas plays a major role in the digestion of carbohydrates, in the digestion of some lipids. The pancreas plays a major role. Likewise, on the same lines, it equally participates in the function of endocrine system also. It releases two types of hormones. Number one is insulin and the other is glucagon. Insulin and glucagon are both antagonistic. It is quite interesting. See, when both are released by the same gland, they function differently on the same aspect. Insulin converts the glucose into glycogen, which is stored in the liver for future use. When we take large quantities of food, the carbohydrates which are taken in excess are converted into glucose, actually, to say during digestion. All the carbohydrates are converted into glucose, and this glucose is utilized for oxidation to some extent. The leftover glucose is converted into the glycogen form and stored in the liver by the activation of this pancreas while it releases insulin. Whereas in conditions of lack of diet, when we don't take proper food, when we lack carbohydrate intake, this glycogen which is already stored in the liver will have to be used up. And this usage is possible only when this glycogen is converted back into glucose for oxidation. This is made possible by glucagon. Insulin is released by the pancreas from the specialized cells called as islets of Langerhans. These were named after a famous scientist called as Langerhans, and hence these are called as, the cells are called as islets of Langerhans. These are micro cells. These are very minute cells called as Langerhans cells. So islets of Langerhans release insulin, and this insulin converts the glucose into glycogen. Quite interestingly, when we don't take adequate amounts of carbohydrates, this glycogen is again converted into glucose by the activation of glucagon. So both are not released simultaneously, but according to the need of the individual, these two hormones are released by the pancreas. So it works on the diet that we take. Then finally we talk about gonads. Gonads are nothing but reproductive glands. These are specific for sexes. In males, they are a pair of testes, and in females, they are a pair of ovaries. Testes are present in small sacs called as scrotum or scrotal sac. These are present one pair in every individual. These testes releases, this is a symbol for males. This testes, a pair of testes, release testosterone hormone. Testosterone. This is male hormone that brings about the functioning or the production of the sperms or spermatozoa in the testes. So, which are responsible for the fertilization and the childbirth. The contribution of the man depends upon the levels of testosterone that his body is having. And this testis is responsible for triggering the macroness, or what we say, the masculinity of the individual. So testosterone is the male sex hormone produced by this testis. In conditions of lack of testosterone, the person will be called as a eunuch, and that situation is called as eunuchism. That is, we call in common terms as impotent or impotency. So testosterone triggers the male sexual characters and the production of sperms. Then finally the ovaries. The ovaries are present in woman, that is a female. These ovaries release two types of hormones. One is estrogen and the other is progesterone. Estrogen and progesterone, these two are the wonderful female hormones responsible for the sustenance of life on this planet with regards to human race. This estrogen is responsible for the maintenance of femininity, the body contours and the beauty, as well as the maintenance of ovulation and the menstrual cycle is due to the estrogen. The estrogen levels maintain the perfect feminine qualities in a girl or a woman. When these estrogen levels are decreased on the attainment of an age of 45 to 50 years in Indian women, we say it is menopause. And during this, the stoppage of or the lessening of estrogen hormone takes place in the ovaries. Then finally, the progesterone is the motherhood hormone. Progesterone is said to be the motherhood hormone because it brings about the changes in the woman both physically and psychologically. She is attracted towards the kids. The motherly affection and the love, the emotional bondage between the mother and the baby is divine. This divine feeling is brought about by progesterone. Actually, to say, the bondage between the baby and the mother inside the womb, that is the uterus, is due to the release of progesterone. Progesterone is responsible for the implantation of embryo. Implantation of embryo in the uterus or the embryo sac is due to the release of progesterone. In conditions of lack of progesterone at the optimum levels, the woman suffers with the failure of pregnancy. So the child or the fetus will have no place to stay with inside the mother's womb, and hence it results in what we say the abortions. Now, after listening to all this, to summarize, to conclude, now you are able to answer the few questions. Number 1, what are endocrine glands? What is the speciality of enzymes, that is hormones? Remember, all hormones are enzymes, but not all enzymes are hormones. Now, what are the various endocrine glands present in endocrine system? Why is pituitary gland called as the master gland? Then, which gland is responsible for emotional stability? Then, which gland is called as dual gland? And what are the two types of hormones that maintain the sustenance of life on this planet? Then, what are the most important changes that every individual, both males and females, experience on release of thyroxine in our body? So these are some of the areas where you need to have a good understanding. And for listening with so much of patience, I thank you once again, and we shall meet with another wonderful session in the other class. This is Smalley signing off for today. Thank you very much. Thank you.